Dr. Nomanul Haq, who is currently a senior faculty member at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. His areas of work includes Islamic history, Islamic intellectual history, and Islamic philosophy, which is more or less the same thing, which is covered in the term Islamic intellectual history. He has previously taught at the University of Pennsylvania and continues to hold a formal faculty position over there. He has been trained at the University College London and Harvard in the fields of medieval Islamic intellectual history, and has also received a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard before taking up an appointment at Brown University. He has recently shared the Waldo Leland Prize of the American Historical Association for his writings in the New Cambridge History of Islam. He has published widely, and his work has been carried by some of the world's most prestigious research journals. It is my pleasure to welcome him for this conversation. I'm going to ask Dr. Noman to open with a few comments, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and that we can open the conversation to the audience. Dr. Noman.
Well, thank you very much. I see some very distinguished people in the audience. Umar Mehman Sahab came, and I'm very, very grateful to him. Intezar Hussain Sahab is here. And if I fail to recognize those whom I ought to, please do forgive me. Bilal and I had been wondering what the format of this event would be, and we just couldn't decide. So it'll take its own life and let it move the way it moves. I think what I'll do is this. I shall start with a few observations. Then I will read a few very, very brief anecdotal expressions, and then I'll do some analysis, after which I am at the mercy of Bilal and the audience. So let me begin with the observations that I want to make. Let me say that over the past so many years, I have talked about these observations in various forums, and I've written about them. But perhaps this is the first time when I have such a distinguished gathering listening to me, so I'm hoping that the benefits would be greater than I have ever expected. One thing has to do with the external history of our times, and I often say that since the 19th century, this was the time of what we call the Enlightenment, after the scientific revolution, the Newtonian revolution, changes in the world economy and industrial revolution, and so on and so forth. The world has grown in such a way that no longer any act, any tradition, any economy can flourish in isolation. There can be no isolation, meaning that the global context has become very important. Otherwise, things wither on the periphery. There can be no isolationist existence, as was the case in the medieval world. Worlds were apart, and pockets of communities could survive apart from one another. That is no longer the case. And I believe this is external history. This is not something internal to literature. My interest lies in the inner world of literature, not in external history. But somehow, the manifestation of literature has to be in the outer world. So one cannot be totally oblivious to what is going on outside the realm of literary expression. This has had an ironic consequence, and the consequence is that on the one hand, it has become very, very important for local histories to be studied. You have heard this phrase, all history is local. And this is an ironic statement because all history is local in the sense that somehow to connect local conditions to the wider global perspective, you need to go deep into local traditions. What I mean is that there is now a vertical dimension, vertically downward dimension, when we go more and more into local conditions and local literature and local value systems on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the horizontal dimension in which all of this has to be connected somehow to what is going on in the world. So this is one point that I wanted to make. And since in the spirit of postmodernism, I really don't want to throw any jargon upon you. I hate jargon. And there is this movement called postmodernism, and there is this attitude called postmodernity. And even though this whole attitude, this whole movement has serious problems and questions, I think that it has taught us some very important things in terms of our appreciation of literature and understanding of human expressions. And one of the things that has to be understood is that we have in contemporary times, I don't want to use the word modern, because the word modern is to me loaded, heavily loaded. Let us put it chronologically. If we put it chronologically, then I would say that in the contemporary world we have resisted grand narratives. And resistance of grand narratives would mean that we go deeper into local conditions. Why did Arabs cultivate Greek science? One answer is that Greek sciences were great, and they had to do it. Why was there a scientific revolution? Because Europe had to rise, and human history is just a prelude to the rise of Europe. These are questions, these are answers which are grounded, which are couched in terms of grand narratives, and we have resisted them because they close up historical questions. As for the first one, just as a matter of quick remark, the cultivation of the Greek sciences on the part of the Arabs is something that was historically highly improbable. And the beauty of it lies in the fact that it was so improbable and yet it happened, and therefore one has to ask the question, the local question, as to why did it happen? What were the conditions? So rather than closing up historical questions, you open up historical questions and open new vistas. And this is something that postmodernism has given us. It may not have given us answers, it may not have given us good outcomes, we may not agree with the outcomes, but it has in the process opened up new vistas of analysis, and they are very important vistas through which we look and observe important things. So this is the first observation I want to make. The second observation, and they might look to you as unconnected, but I very much hope that I'm able to bring some connections in them. They look isolated and haphazard, but I hope that some connections, important fundamental connections, become clear as my discourse moves on. So the second thing is this thing which I call the severance of tradition, the rupture. The word rupture is very good, rupture. Now, in the history of the colonial world, there is a rupture, meaning that colonial societies were cut off from their own tradition. Lord Macaulay, for example, had an educational policy which connected the locals to the Western history and disconnected from their own legacies. So there has been a rupture. And it is this rupture which makes us see, sources of all important ideas into a particular tradition, not recognizing that those ideas, attitudes may have been part of their own legacy. This is the deep irony. This is the deep irony of things. You remember that talked about post-modernity and postmodernism. Postmodernity is an attitude. And that attitude I see way earlier in the Arabic tradition, in the Persian tradition. I mean, I see that attitude very much in Bedil, for example. Sher Khub Monina Darad, good verse has no meaning. Monina Darad, or I see it. I have. Maman Sahab sitting before me, a scholar of Arabic, Qudama ibn Ja'far in Naqd al-Sher, saying, Ahsanul Sher akdhabuhu, the best share, the best verse lies most, is the worst liar. The best verse is the but that in an utterly different sense.
Please repeat that.
The Arabic one, the Arabic expression is ahsanul sha'ri. If I use the vowels, ahsanul sha'ri, akzabahu, akzab, the most liar, the worst liar. The best one is the worst liar. This, and I think that if I were to read this expression to Terry Eagleton, he'd be very happy. Terry Eagleton will be overjoyed to hear this thing from somebody writing, I think, in the 12th century. So this rupture is something you have to keep in mind. That when you see, often when one talks about what has been yielded to us by postmodernist analysis, often one is accused of imposing, Western analytical tools onto Urdu and Persian poetry, forgetting that because of this rupture, because of this separation from tradition, one does not recognize that some of these things, some of these attitudes exist in the Persian tradition and in the Arabic tradition, way before that. So that is the second thing I want to say. And the third observation of mine, which may seem to you unconnected with the first two, it has to do with what I call the autonomy of a piece of literature. I think that to reduce a work of art to its external conditions, to the biography of the writer, to the intention of the writer, to certain political and ideological frameworks, is a mistake. I have often used, appropriated a passage from Charles Dickens. I have plucked it out of its environment and I use it for my own purposes, where there is a conversation between the lord of the mansion and a worker of the mansion, a maid, a conversation between the maid and the Lord says, this floor looks much too empty. Let us have a carpet here. Let's have a carpet. And the maid says, what kind of a carpet, my lord? And the Lord says, well, we should have a carpet with birds and flowers and trees on them. To which the maid responds, but my lord, people will be walking over the birds. They'll be trampling those flowers. And the Lord says, they're not those kinds of birds and flowers, you idiot. And this is the point of the autonomy of the work of art, meaning that the flowers and the birds in a work of art, in the rug, make sense only in the context of the rug. They cannot be verified in nature. There is a resemblance indeed. One has to draw one's raw material from nature, from the world around. But what one does with it gives it a new life. It is creation. Thereby it is creation. Manzar balandi par aur hum bana sakte. That is the idea. Arsh se pare hota kaash ke makan apna. We want to build a house beyond the horizons. above the horizon. It is that creation of a new world with its own logic, which will make sense on its own terms. A narrative is its own reference, not in terms of its verification. Recently, an art historian whose name is Valerie Gonzalez, a friend of mine, Valerie Gonzalez, was a student of the one I consider the greatest historian of Islamic art in the contemporary world, Oleg Gerbar. Oleg Gerbar was a professor at Harvard. I took a few courses with him, and then he went to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Valerie Gonzalez was his student, and she has a book which has a rather bland title. I don't like the title of the book. It's called Beauty and Islam. She asked me to write an introduction to it, which I did. This was a lecture she gave in French at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London. And one of the greatest things about her is that she uses phenomenology, Husserl and so on, in order to interpret certain verses of the Quran. And I think that this is how, perhaps, if I may be so bold as to say, that this is how maybe tafasir should be written now. She talks about the story of the Solomon, of the palace of Solomon, King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba, Bilqis. And the famous story known to you, Saqi Simi, comes from there, that the queen steps on a floor and she considers it to be water, and she lifts her skirt, and then she is told that it is not water. It looks like water, but it is not water. And from there she develops this whole discourse between resemblance and representation.